Okay, it's 6 o'clock, just letting people finish filtering in. This is going to, if you didn't catch the messages, this is going to be a study session because we have our exam this week. Those of you that like to log in early, I really appreciate that. I was actually a little later than I wanted to be because a student that was taking one of my other midterms was just, yeah, kind of being difficult. As always, if you get kicked out, just come back in. Okay, so what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to really have a presentation up or anything, is that I have my study guide that I'm going to be looking at. If by chance you haven't done your study guide yet, I suggest pulling it up so you can take notes too, however you take notes, and just have that list of words to look at, because that's going to be important for this session. I am recording this, good. And then because this is a wholly new test, I just made this on Thursday. I do have the test at my disposal too, so that if I don't know exactly what I'm getting at with the thing being on the study guide, I have access to that as well. Let's just answer the number one most asked question right off the bat. What do the questions look like? We have 36 multiple choice questions worth 2 points each. And then we have 2 essay questions. One of them is worth 10 points, and the other one is worth 18 points. So I would suggest putting about twice as much effort into the one worth 18 points compared to the one that's worth 10 points. Both short-ish answer questions, right? Give it at least, each of those, put a couple paragraphs into each of those. I would say that you're not really answering them unless you're writing at least a couple paragraphs for each. And the second one may be something equating a rough essay. So that's the big, always the big question. And I believe this test is worth a total of 100 points. You will have 90 minutes to take the exam. And I did calculate that to try to be fair. I think 36 multiple choice, which, yeah, I think it's a good amount of time. If anyone has overwhelming problems with it not being enough time, please let me know. On that similar note, if you are someone who has a disability waiver that gives you double time to take tests for whatever reason, please send me an email as soon as possible so that we can set up alternate means for you to take that exam. The mechanic that had previously allowed me to make that process easier isn't quite working. So I have to do kind of a clunky, untechnological workaround. Okay, so with that said, are there any questions, first of all, on the course itself, not necessarily the study guide material? Everything working okay? Yeah? I don't see any questions. Okay. Thank you, Amanda, for using your thumbs up. Those are helpful. Okay. Cool. Okay, so then seeing no big what the hell's happening in this class questions, I'm going to shift over to the study guide. Are there any questions on material or topics on the study guide?
I was wondering on the could be essays, for what do Democrats and what do Republicans believe? Is that just like everybody or like everything or what?
So that's a great question. I could see how that could be a really intimidating, big question. No, actually, I'll let you know right now that those are multiple choice questions. I just, part of this course is basic political literacy, right? So if you are a person that's made it to this point in your life, and there are plenty of people who do, because we don't actually teach this stuff in high school, if you don't actually know what Republicans believe and you don't actually know what Democrats believe, then look into that and figure it out, right? So it's in the, a lot of that stuff is in the presentation that I gave on politics. A lot of that, you know, you can actually look up the presidential party platforms. You could take a peek at that a little bit and find some of that stuff out. I just have a question, 2 questions on the test, one for Democrats, one for Republicans, well, one about Democrats and one about Republicans, that it's just, it's a basic political literacy thing. If you are a super political person and super politically savvy, don't worry about those questions. You'll be able to pick it out right away. I think that, yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question. It might be a dumb one, but like, what do you mean by ways of knowing?
Yeah, that was addressed in the first lecture. I guess I'm going to try to mention which lecture they were mentioned, and so you can go back if you really need to dig into it. That was in the first lecture. A way of knowing is, it's a really super vague term. That's just the term I've heard most in talking between disciplines in academia, right? When we talk to each other, sometimes it could be called discipline, it could be called way of knowing, it could be called a field. So ways of knowing are the way that you come to know something, that you come to understand the world. So sociology is a way of knowing, literature is a way of knowing, religion is a way of knowing, politics is a way of knowing, right? It's a way of understanding our world that we live in. And some of those do things one way, other of them do things other ways, right? The approach that a sociologist would take to studying, say, why people believe in certain deities would be different than, say, a monk or a priest would, right? They're just different ways of knowing the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's a super, super broad term. It's just one of those things that we just have to put a pin on and call it something. Yeah, good, good, good. Anything else?
I had a question.
Sure.
What are intersectional identities?
Good. I believe I addressed that in the stratification lecture when we talk about race and class. Intersectional identities are, sometimes they're called, addressed in this thing called identity politics. They're the pieces of ourselves, well, they're big pieces of ourselves. They're big pieces of our personality. So things like race, class, gender, your sexuality, these are all, and as they apply to yourself, right? These are all identities that we hold. And what does that intersectional bit mean? It means that being a, and I really can't see anyone's race right here for most of us, because I just see names. To be a Black person means one thing. To be a white person means another thing. To be a man means one thing. To be a woman means another thing. To have a different gender identity means a different thing. But a Black man has a different lived experience than a Black woman does, right? So that's what we're talking about with intersectional identities. It's the identity is the Black person, man, white person, woman, that sort of thing. Those are the identities. And then how they intersect, how they interrelate with each other, that's what we're talking about with intersectional identities. Those intersections and how they combine with each other to make us the people that they are. Does that make sense? Because that is an important part of the test.
Yeah, thank you.
Good, very good. Yeah, that stuff was in the stratification lecture. If that sounds super interesting to you, that's something that the fields of women's studies in particular has put a lot of, and feminist scholars in general has put a lot of stuff into. Good question. Anything else?
Are our essays going to be, do we have to provide resources, or as long as it's something that we've discussed?
No, you don't have to put citations in the essay or references in the essay itself. It is intended to be like you were writing it on a piece of paper in the classroom. I don't expect like references or anything like that. Good question. Anything else?
Is there a difference between horticultural and pastoral economies, or is there a reason why they're grouped together on the slide?
It's a great question. I think I made a distinction when I was talking about it, but I'll definitely make that distinction now, because that is why. So part one of the study session and the study guides is to provide you the information that will be on the test. Part two of it is to make sure I've taught everything that will be on the test. So there is a big distinction between horticultural and pastoral societies. Horticultural society, well, first of all, though, they both are kind of still hunter-gatherer-ish, right? They both still hunt, they both still gather from the environment, but they both have a major advantage of producing food that, and I just pulled up the chat and that's there for my reference. 1 second, Taryn. So they both have the advantage of providing more food than just hunting and gathering wood. Now the difference is that horticultural societies, they grow their food, right? They grow their bonus food, right? If this makes any difference for you, most typically horticultural societies starches, they grow things like yams and potatoes because that stuff will last for a while and it adds a significant amount of calories into the diet. If that helps you think, fine, you don't need to know that.
You don't have any.
Okay, Nicole had a mistake there. And then pastoral societies, then they herd their animals, right? They make meat to make extra food, right? So it could be reindeer, it could be goats, it could be sheep, it could be cattle, right? But both of them make extra food that they couldn't get from the environment, but horticultural does plants, pastoral does meat. Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah. Now let me see what Taryn said. For the culture of note on the study guide, are they going to be multiple choice question or more essay related? Well, if some, I will give the roundabout now. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. It does. Okay. So the cultures of note are more multiple choice related, right? I could easily put those into the terms of note higher up in the key terms. The ones that could be essays are definitely underneath the section could be essays. Actually, that's a really good question, Taryn. I didn't, again, this is the first draft for me too. So yeah. Anything else?
What percentage of Americans are middle class for the essay question? Do you want that to be like specific, or do you want it to be more of like a roundabout, like generalized answer about the world? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I want you to have a concept of what percentage of Americans are middle class. Can anyone give me an estimate? Well, that's not necessary. It's about 30%. It's hard to tell exactly, but it's about 30%. If you tell me something like 20% or 40%, I see you're processing that. If you tell me like 80%, then I know you're way off, right? Because the thing is that we're trying to get us to break the concept of is that many people think that almost all Americans are middle class, but that's simply not true. The reality of the matter is that it's about 30%. And then 30% plus 30% of the working class population makes it about 60% of Americans are either middle or working class. So that's most Americans. It's just a real, yeah. So I think that was a long-winded answer. It's about 30%. Ryan has a question about the midterm. I am not super equipped at this very moment to answer that question, but let's see if I can do it super quick. And if you're saying stuff in the chat right now, I can't see. This is a super common question for a lot of things. Everything is always done due on Sundays, except for discussions. So if you're wondering, well, is it due like Tuesday or Monday or whatever, it is always due on Sunday. But that doesn't specifically answer the question for the midterm because I am talking to by time, which is always fun. Okay, let's see here. Looking at the syllabus and yes, your midterm is due next week. So don't worry about it this week, just worry about the exam this week. Worry about the midterm paper next week. So that'll be next Sunday. So looking at my calendar, that will be due on the 25th of October. A very practical question. But what else? So your things that are due this week are the study guide and the exam itself. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Andy. I didn't see your nature and nurture thing. Yeah, I can explain nature versus nurture. Nature versus nurture is a big, it's one of the big ideas in college, very much so what are you going to discuss in your liberal arts education thing? So, I'm sure some of you have already talked about this in other classes. The nature element of it is, when people say, we are the people we are, or people are who they are because of nature. It's because like you were born this way, or like your genetics determined it, or something like that. You just came out that way, right? Nurture then means that your experience in life, whether it's because you got sick from a communicable disease, or you were traumatized as a child, or you earned a whole bunch of money, right? Anything you did over the course of your life, the way that the universe has nurtured you makes you who you are. So the debate is, are we the people we are who we are because we just are this way? Or are we the people we are because the world has done something to us? That is the nature versus nurture debate. Now, of course, it's a little bit of both, right? Sociologists tend to go a little bit on the nurture side. Anthropologists tend to go a smidge more on the nature side than sociologists. Psychologists tend to go way more on the nature side, and then biologists obviously go on nature side, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to ask you who falls where. I just want you to know what is the nature versus nurture debate. Any other questions? I'm looking at the study guide itself, so please, if you have a question, chime in with words, audio words. Be familiar with the distinction between absolute deprivation and relative deprivation. Absolute deprivation is when your poverty threatens your health. Relative deprivation occurs when you feel poor or you don't feel poor. It's about how you feel in comparison to your community. Anything else? I think because we've had tech problems in this class, and I know that's why you guys are all have your cameras off, and that's fine. That's why I told you to do. But it is super hard for me to tell if you are satisfied or not in terms of what we've gone over. So please, if you want to talk about it, thanks, Brooke. If you want, now everyone's got to chime in with their thumbs up. Okay. Anyway, does anyone need to go over anything else?
What was code switching again?
Code switching, great question. Code switching occurs, and honestly, I am sure some of it, if you do code switching, and some of us do and some of you don't, some of us don't. If you do code switching, then you've experienced, right? You might just not know what it's called. If you grew up in if you grew up in Westerville, right, and you go to Otterbein, there is a chance that you don't code switch, but most of us do. Any of us that exist in multiple communities code switch, usually. It's when you change the way you talk, the way you interact, maybe the words you use, and you just do it different with different groups of people. That's code switching. So for example, when I am talking to other academics at, say, well, when we had the cafeteria space, a cafeteria space at Otterbein, I will speak in one way. When I am talking to people I grew up with in Western Pennsylvania, I'll speak a different way. And it's not just cursing or not cursing, right? It's linguistics too. It's tonality. And when I think about it, I can't even do it. I can't even turn on the Western Pennsylvanian accent right away, right? It just shifts when you're in a different setting. This is socially interesting on a number of notes. many African American people and scholars of race talk about this because Black people have a particular phenomena, an intensity of this, because AAVE, African American Vernacular English, that is something that has been much villainized in history, right? So many Black people switch between one way of talking among white people and non-African Americans, and then a different way of talking when they're with their family or groups of friends or whatever. And sometimes that can come off to people as being disingenuous, but the reality of the matter is that code switching is just something that humans do. And the actual difficulty surrounding the Black community with code switching, a lot of it very much has to do with issues of race in our country. And there's a whole lot of that. So code switching is it's pretty interesting in that regard. It's a really pretty interesting phenomenon. Good.
That was
That
in
makes sense.
lecture 3, right?
I believe so, yes.
I don't think we're able to access the slides for that chapter.
Is it the, I'll make a note of that. Is that a matter of, I accidentally posted the JPG instead of the PowerPoint? Is that what happened there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll fix that. So it was lecture 3 notes? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a quick fix. I should be able to put that up pretty quick. Then which, for my reference, which section are you in? Are you in technically the evening class or technically the weekday class?
It is a weekday, right? It's in the evening. Whatever this time
This is the time you're supposed to be in?
Yeah. Okay,
so that means you are in section EV. I know the way we've handled this just is all kinds of different confusing. Yes, very good. Great. Any other questions?
I had one question about that. Does that mean that it's specifically when, like, do accents fall into that?
Yeah, accents fall into it, absolutely. And it's easiest to study. A lot of it has to do with accents. Switching from one language to another is a type of code switching, but it is much more dramatic than just accents within one language. Really, when you're talking code switching, you're largely talking about switching from one, accents, dialects, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
That makes sense? Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just thought it was specifically changing languages.
Oh no.
So I didn't realize it was for both.
No, I would say that's actually more about dialects. It's actually more about dialects than it is about languages. It applies to language, but it's more about dialects. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Great. Anything else?
So that African American vernacular is a type of code switching then?
AAVE is a type of dialect. People who, I guess you could say, speak AAVE, even though that's not a perfect use of the word. People that have that dialect as part of them, so it's a dialect, not a code switching, right? You switch from speaking formal non-slang English to a more slang dialect like AAVE, or like I would switch into Western Pennsylvania hillbilly, right? You switch dialects. And when you switch dialects like that, you are doing code switching. Anything else?
For firm, do you mean as in a company or like a market?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I'm not talking about like your be firm or soft. I am talking, we call them companies usually. Organizations that do business, right? That's the anthropological term, firm. and that is pulled directly from your book. Sociologists would probably use different words, but that is one of the anthropology terms, and it works, so I decided to use it, yeah. So those things that we call companies. Now, the thing is, why we wouldn't call them companies is a thing like a nonprofit organization, like my wife works for, or even a college, that is also by this definition, a firm, even though those are nonprofit, right? So the word firm incorporates both for-profit ventures and profit ventures. Yeah.
Another question.
Yes.
So first language is the language spoken in the child's home, like when
Yes.
house, like they first grew up in?
Yes. So for the majority of people in the United States, their first language was English, right? But honestly, there's not so much study of that, right? Because we social scientists tend to study the things that are novel or not everyone, right? So the term first language is, yeah, it's the first language you learn growing up. And usually we talk about that in the context of people who learn to speak something other than English in the home. So for example, my grandmother, her first language was Deutsch, which is the Pennsylvania Dutch language. Yeah. Oh, sum up folkways? Yeah, so Kat, I'm sorry if you said this a couple minutes ago. I can absolutely do that. For some reason, I'm only looking at the group chat like every 2 minutes or so. Can I sum up? Yeah, so folkways are, well, I'll talk about the whole complex of concepts there. So let's talk about values first. Values are the big ideas we have in society, right? We value that everyone should be comfortable in society, right? Then everyone can live their lives, right? Those are big values we all hold, regardless of our political belief, is that everyone should be allowed to be who they are, right? That tends to be a big thing most people believe. And that takes a lot of permutations, right? So we have values, and then from our values come norms. Norms are the rules in society. Now, different norms have different degrees of severity. A more, did I have more on this list? I don't think I have mores on this list. Mores are very strong norms, and I don't think you need to know that for the exam. They're very strong norms that are very heavily enforced, and mores tend to be laws, right? A law is a norm that is heavily enforced, and it is part of the legal code, right? It's a type of norm. A folkway is another type of norm. I finally got to answering the question. Folkway is another type of norm. These are more manners. They are more things we do to make people feel comfortable. They're super light, they're super loose. You don't put someone in prison for violating a folkway. You give them a dirty look, or you say, that was really rude, or you might say, thank you very much, right? So you hold a door open for someone when you think they might have trouble getting through. That is a folkway. You give people presents around holidays or for their birthday. That is a folkway. That makes sense, everyone? Yeah, cool, good, thanks, Lindsay. Anything else, guys? And people who aren't guys. And next week, is the midterm paper different from short essays? It's longer, is the answer to it. The midterm paper is longer, and it absolutely requires citations and references. So some of the essays don't really require citations and references. The midterm does. and it's longer and it's more detailed. But other than that, it's fundamentally the same. It's just writing.
You haven't posted the prompt for that yet, have you?
I don't believe I have. No, I have not. I wanted to give you guys the.
Yeah, I wouldn't start it anyways.
Yeah, yeah. I want to keep you focused. Is the short of it. If anyone really wants to start in on it, send me an email or something. I might post it early, but yeah.
Is there a time limit on it?
On what? The test?
On the, yeah,
It's 90 minutes.
90 minutes, okay.
Yep. It's I wanted to give you, yeah. Basically the short of it is if I don't put a time limit on the test, I can't really let you do it open book, open notes, and I can't really keep people from cheating in that way, right? So the way we do that is to put time limits on it to make sure you're not Googling every single thing. And honestly, let me just say it again, Googling every single thing in a social science class is usually a very bad idea because different people talk about different things differently on the internet. If people were talking about the middle class relating to the bourgeoisie, for example, I know they probably found that somewhere weird on the internet because sociologists almost never do talk about it that way. That's just one example.
Or the political elite being the Illuminati.
Yeah, well, that's a different thing. Oh, let me roll my eyes heavily. That's a different thing entirely. Yeah, yeah.
Are the political? Is everybody in the upper class part of the political elite, or is that
the power elite?
Or the power elite? Yeah.
No, I would say that if you're going to draw a Venn diagram, that everyone who is in the upper class, everyone who is power elite is in the 1% in the upper class, but not everyone in the upper class is power elite. We're talking about super specific individuals. Yeah. Taryn is asking, are the macro and micro levels related to economics or other aspects? We're talking about levels of analysis there with micro level and macro level. So, and each scientific discipline looks at macro and micro levels in different ways. In sociology, yeah, you could look at economics that way, but you could also look at politics that way. You could look at stratification that way. You can apply it, but that's not necessarily really what I'm asking at. I just want you to know that macro means big, micro means little, and if you're doing social scientific research, you should really pick one of those before really going to your research project. Yeah. Is the study guide also due Sunday? Yes. Wait, 1 second. Okay, I'll talk about Kadeem's question in a second. The shorter question, is the study guide also due this Sunday? Yes, it is. I strongly suggest to you, though, doing the study guide before you do the exam, because that means it will be that you helping you study. But yeah, both of those assignments are due on Sunday. Now, Kadeem is asking, just to be sure, on the study guide, should we define all of the vocabulary and write 2 short essays? And then what about the cultures of note? Should we just know this for the midterm, or should we do this section for this section on the study guide? Honestly, guys, I need to stop saying guys. That irritates me too. I do not, I look at them, right, to make sure you've actually put something into it. I don't check whether you've done it right or wrong, right? Because it's worth so little points in the scheme of the course that really what matters about the study guide is that you do it. Because when people don't do the study guide, when they don't put the effort into the study guide, it absolutely shows up on their exams, right, is the thing. That's why I give the study guide. So I'm not super picky about what exactly you do with the study guide or don't do with the study guide. I suggest that you, obviously the key terms, you're giving definitions. And then with the could be essays, be able to, you know, give more detail on those things. With cultures of note, I would say be aware of, you know, what those cultures are like, what they do, because they're gonna be showing up on the test as well. Does that answer the question? Yeah, more or less, yeah. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, so we didn't put that much time into the Nuxalk Nation with the potlatch culture because that was one of our failed movie night adventures. Just be aware of who they are, what they do. They are a Native American nation. Well, they're a First Peoples nation because they're in Canada. And the potlatch is their tradition of feasting and dance and performance. And potlatches are events in, the name of the event is potlatch. That's basically the key of that one. Can you talk about the African American Vernacular English and what is the African National Congress? Good question. Those are two very different things. I could see how people would think they might be the same thing because they appear next to each other. So AAVE, African American Vernacular English, is it's something almost everyone in our society is aware of. They don't necessarily know that there are words for it, or especially the academic words. And a lot of the words for it in our society's past have been very deeply ugly, right? If you know what Ebonics is / was, that's the same thing. AAVE is basically Ebonics, but Ebonics in the 90s became so heavily politicized in very ugly ways that now we're calling it something else so that we can actually talk about it academically and get away from that ugliness of the 90s. It is, so the dialects Black people use they're not often the same dialects that white people in the same region use, right? And they're not really Southern, they're not really of a given city, it's its own thing. And by studying it as its own thing, we can understand that better, right? It's not saying it is a superior language or that it's an inferior language or anything else like that. It's just something that also exists. Does that make sense for that term? Yes, good. Now, the African National Congress has nothing to do with the United States. The ANC was it's related to South Africa. So you could even put on your study guide underneath it where apartheid is, you could also put ANC. The African National Congress was a political organization that for a period of time was a political resistance organization, could be classified as resistance fighters, could be classified as terrorists, right? They did do violent things in the 60s and 70s to try to liberate Black people in South Africa. They got through the apartheid period and with Nelson Mandela as their leader. Nelson Mandela and other leaders of the ANC were put into prison in South Africa. And then, but those same leaders also led the ANC from prison by sending secret messages and all that sort of thing. And they led ANC to becoming, to be a real, one second, Sayeda, a real force politically in terms of the way South Africa operates. ANC, after apartheid fell in 1991, ANC actually became a political party. And ANC is actually the dominating political party in South Africa today. South Africa is currently a democracy, but its big political party is the ANC, and there are other political parties as well. Now, Saida says, are we supposed to actually write the actual essays on the study guide? You don't need to. You put down the information that you would find helpful on the exam, because you're allowed to use your notes on the exam. The study guide is part of your notes. You're allowed to use this for the exam, right? So put whatever you want to on the study guide is my short answer to that. But yeah, you don't have to write out the whole essays if you don't want to for that. Anything else? Be sure. Ascribe status is something. Yes, that's right, Kifa. A scribe status is the stuff that can't be changed about you. It's the year you were born. It is your race. It is it's stuff you can't change. It could be the class, your class at birth, right? Because if your family was super poor, for example, that when you were born, that actually has an impact on you through the rest of your life, even if you get money. But achieve status is the stuff you do over the course of your life, right? So how much money you make is generally considered to be an achieve status. But achieve status can also be bad things. It could be, are you in prison, right? Usually people don't choose to be in prison. They are put in prison because something happened to them or they did something that is also an achieve status. But most of the time we're talking about usually good things, I guess, with achieve status. But yeah, ascribed is stuff that you can't change, right? Anything else?
Can you give an example of the type of questions we'd see for the cultures?
Yeah. Well, there are multiple choice type questions. I try to be pretty generous in not getting super duper specific. Where I put the little extra points under there. So with South Africa, when I ask you about South Africa, that question's going to be about apartheid, right? When I ask you about the Nuksalk, that's going to be about potlatch. When I ask you about Russia, that's going to be about the Russian Revolution, and specifically the revolution that was called the October Revolution, right? So I gave you those specific things there. With the Nasarema, I want you to know about the Nasarema as discussed in the body ritual of the Nasarema, right? That article. And then let me just look what I want from North Korea, because I don't remember. Let me just look at that real quick. Basically, with North Korea, I just wanted you to know which side they were on in the Cold War. That's what I'm looking at, right? That's what kind of country is North Korea, I suppose, is what I want you to know there. That's really the short. Yeah.
Sounds good, thanks.
Great. Anything else? Yeah, I'll talk about the October Revolution. I'd like nothing better. The thing that Americans often call the Russian Revolution is actually more specifically called the October Revolution, even though it happened in November because they have different calendars, but that's not what I'm asking you about, whatever. Anyway, the Russian Revolution, I'll just call it that from here out, It was the transition from a failing, falling apart. It was the last trend from a failing, falling apart monarchy in Russia to being the Soviet Union, right? To being a socialist economy with an avowedly communist government. And the reason, there's three big reasons, there are many, many reasons, but there are three big reasons why the October Revolution happened. First of all, the Communist Party was becoming very popular, right? So like these were political ideas that resonated with people, that rich people shouldn't control everything, that there needs to be a better way to do the economy. And we Russian people in 1917 thought that communism might be the way to do it. So communism was politically popular. Second of all, Russia lost really, really bad during World War I. The Russian Revolution occurred in 1917. That was the end of World War I, but it didn't look like it then. World War I ended in, if I remember correctly, 1918, right? So they were a year away from it, right? They didn't know when it would end. The Tsar was absolutely politically inept, right? He was politically inept. He and his generals were politically inept because they were all part of the this aristocracy that were just generals because their daddies were generals and that sort of thing. There was no merit to it. And so the soldiers basically fighting on the front lines of World War I just walked away. They just plumb walked away from their posts because they thought the generals were idiots. And you can do that when you are fighting in Germany and your home is Russia. You just walk home. So that's the other bit of that. And the soldiers themselves were actually big backers of the communists, which is politically interesting. Now, let me just look that up real quick. Yeah, and another thing to involve in that there is that the reason why communism was popular and not, well, the reason why communism was popular is because everyone was poor as dirt, right? Everyone under the monarchy, all the power was concentrated in the monarchy behind the Tsar. So the third lead cause of the Russian Revolution is everyone was dirt poor. The communists were talking about giving working people and people in poverty more stuff, a better life, and that also greatly resonated with that. This is not going to be on the test, but if you are interested in that period of time, there's a really amazing book written called 7 Days That Shook the World. It was a first-hand account of the Russian Revolution. I do not remember. John Reed was the author that wrote that. He was actually an American that traveled to Russia during that revolution, if that interests you. If it doesn't interest you, you don't need to know that. Anyway, though, yes, that's what you need to know about the October Revolution, and probably not that great of detail. Anything else? Okay, so I take your not clamoring over each other to be relative satisfaction with what we've gone over. This is, I suppose, last call. Any final questions? Difference between structural mobility and, okay, yes. There's three elements there. So social mobility is changing your position in the social hierarchy, right? that is generally broken into vertical social mobility and horizontal social mobility. Vertical social mobility is going up and down in terms of class status. So if you work at Taco Bell and then you get an office job, that would generally be considered vertical social mobility, right? You go from a in-class or maybe lower class job at Taco Bell to an office job, right? Vertical. If you lose that job at Taco Bell and become unemployed, and then maybe lose your apartment or whatever, that's downward vertical social mobility. Now, if you have your job at Taco Bell and then it's too far away from your house or whatever, and they open up a job at Pizza Hut, that is horizontal social mobility. You go from one position that has relatively the same amount of pay to another position that has, the same amount of pay, horizontal. Now, all of the stuff I just talked about is individual social mobility, right? I was talking about you and your job. With structural social mobility, we are talking about masses of groups of people changing their social position in the hierarchy, right? So we talk about things like deindustrialization in the United States as it occurred in the 1980s, right? We lose thousands and thousands of jobs out of factories. And because we lose thousands of jobs out of factories, we change from being a manufacturing economy to this weird service/tech economy we exist in today. And because of that, the American people, on a structural sense, have probably moved down in terms of our socioeconomic class status. So we've all collectively undergone downward vertical social mobility in terms of that. So I see a couple questions have cropped up. That's good. 2 questions about the workplace. So let's talk about the workplace. Specifically, when we talk about different economies that have existed, we can address social structures that exist in one economy versus another economy versus another economy. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, almost all work that was done, almost all economic activity occurred in the home or where you live, right? That is often called cottage industry work, where you are doing because people lived in cottages, right? So people doing work in the home, right? The workplace only really, as its own entity, like an office or a factory or whatever, only really came into being in the Industrial Revolution, right? So it created a new social space where you had to interact with people that you didn't necessarily know, right? And that was a new, weird social dynamic for the Industrial Revolution. Because prior to that, if you worked on a farm, you lived on a farm, your coworkers are your family members, right? You don't need to deal with weird office talk and weird social dynamics and learning that pagan accounting is kind of a jerk. You don't need to learn those things if there isn't a such thing as a workplace. And that's the big thing there, is that a workplace is this thing that came into being in the revolution. It continues in post-industrial society that we live in, but interestingly, I'm not sure that we might see a kickback. Thanks for the clarification, Bailey. I'll get to that in a second. I'm not sure we won't get back to the cottage industry stuff, because I'm teaching in my basement right now, right? And we're seeing an interesting transition happening relating to COVID that I don't think is going to go away, really, which is very interesting. Okay. I'll talk about conspicuous consumption and then cultural relativism. Conspicuous consumption is a specific phenomena that exists in the United States. It is not, it's becoming less common. Really, the height of conspicuous consumption was the late 1990s into the 2000s among upper middle class people. So upper middle class people, remember, those are the rich people you know, right? You probably don't actually know any upper class people. They go to different schools, they go to different places. You probably don't know them. The rich people you know are probably upper middle class. Upper middle class people are prone to spending money toward the end of showing how much money they have, right? On going on elaborate vacations, of driving around in overly fancy cars, of showing their money off, of living in really, really big houses that everyone can see, right? That's the phenomena of conspicuous consumption. Upper class people don't do that. They hide themselves, actually. They wear more subtle clothes. You see Mark Zuckerberg wearing a sweatshirt that looks like he got it at JCPenney's, but he looks really good in it. Not that much better looking than the rest of people, but he has tailors, right? That's what makes him look super good in his clothing. It's just the subtleties between the rich people we know and the truly upper class people. That's what conspicuous consumption is that tendency to really spend money toward the end of other people knowing how much it costs. Now, we talked about the workplace. Transculturalism is, and that's kind of in a complex of concepts. There is appropriation. Appropriation, let's just look at these terms we have. Let's tie our terms together. So I have appropriation. I have cultural diffusion. Yes, so appropriation is basically, quote unquote, stealing a concept from another culture, not caring where it comes from, just using it because you think it's fun, right? That's cultural appropriation. An example of that is dressing up in a, we know the sugar skull motifs around Halloween. Now, those sugar skull motifs, those are more accurately tied with Dia de los Muertos in Mexico and other parts of the Latin American world, right? That means a certain thing, and it isn't actually intended to be a spooky skeleton Halloween costume, right? It's supposed to be a specific thing for Day of the Dead, and Day of the Dead is very different than Halloween actually is, right? They're different things. It's not supposed to be spooky. It's supposed to be about honoring your ancestors. So you can make some reasonable arguments that many of the ways that mainly white Americans use Day of the Dead imagery in their everyday decorating, for example, that's really appropriation-y. And I'm guilty of that too. I love sugar skull imagery, but I'm super careful about that because it is a very deep meaning to other people. So that's one. And then cultural diffusion, though, is when one culture adopts something from another culture because they like it and they think it's good. They think it's good. It's something that we desire, right? Food is a really keen example of that. You can find hummus almost anywhere in the United States now. You couldn't find hummus at a grocery store on the East Coast in 1989, right? You only would have been able to find it in a health food store. And there are actually some really dated 90s that talk about like really bougie people eating hummus because it's health food, really kind of wild stuff that is really badly dated. that is an example of cultural diffusion, right? People from the Arabic-speaking world, the Middle East, the Mediterranean areas, they brought hummus to us, and then it diffused across the country. And you can say that for a lot of modes of all kinds of immigrants' foods. It happened with the Italians when the Italian immigrants came to the United States, and they brought pasta and pizza. And now it's very much part of the American culture. Hummus is a good example. Taco trucks are a good example of that, right? It's cultural diffusion. Now, getting to the thing that was asked like half an hour ago. Transculturalism then is somewhere between appropriation and diffusion, right? Where it's more than diffusion. It's more than a simple concept like grinding up chickpeas and putting sesame paste in it and eating that on chips, right? But it is not appropriation because it's a new created thing due to the interaction of the societies and the cultures that do it, right? I was just talking to my wife about this on the car ride today. I feel like I should get some free chips for this or something. And yes, Taco Bell is a big evil corporation, but I feel Taco Bell is actually a beautifully American company because well, at least they did this more prior to COVID. They used, I think everyone knows Taco Bell, and their wild food that they produce, and they're just putting nacho cheese on everything and mixing and mashing and doing all kinds of wild food that is basically made out of Mexican ingredients, much has an American melted cheese spin onto it. That is transculturalism. That is two cultures interacting in a way that creates a new thing. So diffusion, appropriation, transculturalism, those are all kind of the same ideas, but very much different things as to what's actually happening. Does that all make sense? Yeah. Any questions on that?
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like there's an extremely fine line between it.
Yes, absolutely. There is an intensely fine line between it. A good example of that is that in New Age communities right now, over the last couple of years, there has been a heavy argument over the use of sage in blessing areas because in the New Age / whatever you want to call it movement, saging your house to making it clean of positive, make it nice positive energy. Well, that white sage is part of Native American religious workings, right? So is the use of that stuff by people like, say, Kim Kardashian in her bathroom, is that appropriation or is that something else? Yes, it's all about intensely fine lines. And I would say the big distinction between appropriation and diffusion is respect for the thing that it came from, right? And understanding of the thing that it came from. And when people are appropriating, it's because they don't know where something came from and they don't care. But as with many things, it is also in the eye of the person who is being appropriated, the person that is being discriminated against, right? So it would behoove white people like me to be very careful with that. And if someone's saying that it's being appropriated, to believe them. Yeah, good questions.
So is it appropriation for a white person to wear a poncho in Mexico or like dreadlocks in Africa, or is that something else, like enculturation or something?
Maybe. Maybe is the short answer. I would say that if you are in Mexico or New Mexico, as I know, if you're in New Mexico, a woven wool poncho is the best winter coat you can have, right? So it's not an issue, right? Because that's what everyone wears. But yeah, they're super duper fine lines, and that's one of the difficulties of our society that we live in today. Yeah. And that's part of this class, is to help us understand those things. Any other questions? Will this recording be on Blackboard? Yeah, I'll get that up, barring technical issues, by tomorrow morning, hopefully. Usually when I'm done recording this, it doesn't pop up in my having it, or whatever we want to call that, until about 9:30 or so. And then that takes about half an hour for me to download it, and then another hour or so to upload it. And then by that time, my children have exhausted me to the point where I can't do anything else. So I'll try to get it up as soon as I can. I'm going to shoot for noon tomorrow. Scientific method, sure. The scientific method is a series of procedures that scientists use to make sure we are doing science. I would prefer, and I say this a lot, that we called it the scientific procedure, because it's not just one method. It is steps that we follow to make sure we are doing it right. So the steps in the scientific method, I'm just going to rattle them off right here, right now. You don't need to know this for the test. Are first review the literature, then generate a hypothesis, then operationalize variables. You don't need to know what any of that means. Then conduct your research, then analyze your research, then share your research. The reason why we go through those stages is to make sure that we have the highest potential possible for creating new information, right? The key to the scientific method is that it is what makes science science. If a discipline is using the scientific method, then it is a science. If they are not using the scientific method, if they don't use the scientific method, they're not a science. So sometimes people say really exceptionally dumb things like, well, when I make my art, it's more science than art, man. No, it's, are you using the scientific method? If you're not using the scientific method, it's not science. You might, yeah. So to do science, you have to do the scientific method. That's really the key. What I'm saying there is political science is not science. It might want to be, but they don't use the scientific method.
So science is just a way of knowing that uses the scientific method, basically.
Absolutely, that's right, yes. The only reason why I wouldn't use that as a definition for everyone is because it uses the word science too many times in it, but yeah, that's a good definition. Anything else? Just seeing if there's any key critical things here. Understand the difference between fascism and communism, as in they're utterly different things. That's part of my getting you to understand politics as well. Often when people don't know what they're talking about, they will call someone who is a socialist a Nazi. And the fact of the matter is that the Nazis were not Nazis, they were fascists. And fascism is all about the supposed superiority of some people over other people, and white supremacy is absolutely fascism, right? Communism, on the other hand, is ideologically in favor of giving all people in the world what they need to live and exist and be happy, hypothetically. And so to equate a communist and a fascist as the same thing are, it's deeply, deeply flawed. Even though Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin operated in similar ways, Stalin was a communist and Hitler was a fascist. And even though they both killed millions of people, their stated ideologies were fundamentally different. They were both authoritarians. They were both horrible, like, people that thought only they should be in charge, but politically they're completely different things. And I think that's pretty good. Any last questions?
How about the difference between communism and socialism?
Okay, good. Communism is, well, God, this is a big question. Okay, for what we're talking about, communism is a government, right? Socialism is an economy. Communism, when it is attempted, tends to go the authoritarian route. It tends to be anti-democratic. And there are people who would call themselves communists that have different visions of that. But that is what we see globally. Communists tend to go along ideologies like Lenin of saying, well, what we need is a dictatorship of the proletariat, where there is just one person in charge, and that one person in charge needs to make the decision for all the people, right? And in doing that, we're actually democratic, which, if that doesn't make sense to you, it's because it doesn't really make sense. While socialism, on the other hand, is all about economics, right? And many people that talk about wanting a socialist economy do to cluster with each other politically, right? They tend to have similar political ideas, but the fact of the matter is that socialism is way more about economics than it is about politics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the communists would have a socialist economy.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely they would, yes. Good.
But you can have socialism in a democratic.
Yes, absolutely. That actually is a point I drive home very hard in my sociology class, but I just don't, we have other things to talk about in this class. Yeah, you can absolutely have a socialist economy and a democratic society. You can have capitalism full bore in a fascist society. That's part of what Hitler did. That's part of what General Pinochet in Chile did. Real wickedly vile dictators have had capitalism. Really wickedly vile dictators have had socialism. Yeah. Anything else? When I talk about gender and linguistics, remember that in some, if you're, this is mainly for the people who only speak English and haven't studied other languages. Languages make just what look like random calls as to is cat female gendered, is dog male gendered, is phone female gendered or neutral or male gendered. And that's what we're talking about with gendered cases in linguistics. That's the big thing driving home there. We will actually talk about gender and sexuality in upcoming units. we have okay, I think we're in pretty good shape. Do you think?
Hex signs.
Okay, hex signs. You know, I don't know if I've addressed this. Hex signs, oh, I got one right here. Let's see if I can get this to show up on the camera. Let's see. This on the back of my phone is not letting you see it. There. Star, you see? Anyway, there's a star on the back of that phone there. That's a Pennsylvania Dutch hex sign. It is the most ubiquitous symbol of the Pennsylvania Dutch. They are traditionally put on barns for good luck, and different hex signs mean different things. I'm not going to quiz you on what hex signs mean, but they're a ubiquitous symbol of the Pennsylvania Dutch, which are people in Pennsylvania of German descent, not Dutch descent. Anything else?
Oh, do you know when people started drinking milk?
Do I have this on here?
Is that pastoral? I'm just wondering if it's like from the pastoral economy, like agricultural.
I can tell you that milk is very important for pastoral societies. And definitely there is more evidence for it in European and African societies than there is in traditionally East Asian societies and North America and South America. There really isn't so much intensely traditional ethnic milk cuisine. And when I say that about, like, say, Mexico, pre-Spanish indigenous Mexican tradition has almost no milk involved in it there. So I would say probably in the societies where it existed, could probably go back to the pastoral era, yeah, but it's not what this class is, yeah. Okay. I think most of us are pretty satisfied. I think if you haven't, I am coming so close to being caught up on all my emails. You are one of the schools I'm caught up on. Please take a look at your grades. If anything's missing, let me know about it so I can fix it. I'm in the process of fixing a lot of those things. You can imagine with about 300 students, there's a lot of little pieces that could go wrong. So make sure your grade looks right. Yeah, if you have any additional questions about this stuff, please ask me Friday or before, if you will, because I don't know what this weekend has to bring for me because I have wild children. If anything goes horribly wrong on your exam when you take it, let me know that sooner rather than later so I know to fix it, because if it goes wrong for you, it might go wrong and probably will go wrong for everyone else. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, send me an email if you have a problem. I will maintain my office hours this week in case you need it. It is on these same numbers that you use to log into this class space. So just log on to it between 6 and 7 on Wednesday if you have specific questions. If you want to take your exam during that time, that would probably be an okay idea. And so you know I'm going to be here at least between 6 and 7. That's just a kind of a serving suggestion. Okay, cool. I am going to call this adjourned. And I will see y'all later.